Awakening is often imagined as a dramatic moment of light, insight, or divine revelation. But the real transformation is far more subtle and far more profound. It begins with perception, not the outward perception of eyes and senses, but the inner perception through which you interpret every experience. Before awakening, the mind acts like a filter, shaping reality through fears, expectations, and beliefs. Every situation is tinted with personal meaning. Every interaction is judged, analyzed, compared, or resisted. But the moment awakening touches a person, this filter begins to dissolve. Awakened people do not suddenly gain supernatural vision. They do not develop the ability to see hidden worlds or secret dimensions. Instead, they lose the layers of distortion that once stood between themselves and life. What once felt so heavy now feels surprisingly light. Old emotional wounds lose their grip. Stories that the mind repeated for years start to sound empty, like echoes of a past that no longer exists. The shift is not about gaining something new, it is about recognizing what was always there. One of the first things awakened people can no longer see is the illusion of threat. Before awakening, almost everything feels personal. A comment, a look, a situation, each can trigger insecurity or self-defense. But as the inner identity softens, there is nothing left to defend. They no longer see life as an opponent. They no longer see others as obstacles or sources of danger. Instead of reacting, they observe. Instead of fearing, they remain open. It is not that life becomes easier, it is that their relationship with life fundamentally changes. Awakened perception becomes spacious. Moments that used to overwhelm them now appear like brief movements of energy. Thoughts that once pulled them into long spirals of overthinking now pass through like clouds drifting across a vast sky. They cannot get entangled in the same mental webs because the sticky surface, the ego that clings to everything, has thinned out or disappeared. Another major shift is the way awakened people see themselves. Earlier, identity felt solid. I am this. I must protect this. I need to defend this image, this reputation, this story. But awakening reveals that identity is fluid, temporary, and largely invented. When this realization becomes embodied, awakened people cannot see themselves as a fixed personality anymore. They see themselves as awareness experiencing a human life, not as a human trying to control awareness. This change affects how they see the world as well. They no longer divide experiences into good and bad, success and failure, right and wrong. Instead, they see everything as information, expressions of the same underlying intelligence. This does not make them passive, it makes them deeply present. When judgment falls away, clarity takes its place. To the awakened, life does not need interpretation. It only needs to be lived. And this simple shift, though invisible from the outside, is the beginning of a completely new way of being. Before awakening, most people move through life with a constant, subtle tension, a feeling that everything depends on their effort, their decisions, their plans, and their ability to manage every outcome. This creates a deep belief in personal control. We try to control how others see us, how events unfold, how the future should look, and even how we should feel inside. But awakening exposes a profound truth. Control was always an illusion we layered over the natural flow of life. Once awakening begins, awakened people cannot see the world through the lens of control anymore. Something in them recognizes that life has been happening effortlessly long before their involvement. Their heartbeat, their breath, their thoughts, the movement of the planet, the unfolding of circumstances. None of this was ever orchestrated by the small personal I they believed themselves to be. When this realization strikes deeply, the old belief in control simply cannot survive. This does not make awakened people passive or indifferent. On the contrary, it makes them more fluid, more responsive, and more alive. Rather than forcing outcomes, they begin to participate in life the way a dancer moves with music, not controlling the rhythm, but responding to it. They stop trying to push the river and begin to flow with it. They understand that control was just another attempt of the ego to feel safe, certain, and significant. Awakened people also stop seeing others as things to manage. They no longer feel the need to fix people, correct them, or guide them toward their own expectations. Every person becomes a sovereign being on their path, learning in their own timing, shaped by experiences they cannot rush or avoid. The awakened cannot impose their vision on others because they no longer see themselves as the center of the universe or as someone who knows what is best for anyone else. Another thing that disappears is the illusion of control over emotions. Before awakening, people believe they must fight their sadness, suppress their anger, or force themselves to feel positive. But awakened perception reveals that emotions are simply energies passing through awareness. They arise, stay for a moment, and dissolve when not resisted. So awakened people no longer try to control their inner world. They allow, observe, and embrace. They let experiences move freely without gripping them. The same happens with thoughts. Instead of trying to control thoughts, pushing some away and clinging to others, the awakened see thoughts as waves appearing on the surface of consciousness. They know thoughts do not need to be believed, followed, or wrestled with. They appear and disappear naturally. When the sense of control dissolves, the mind becomes less crowded, less noisy, and less demanding. Awakened people also stop seeing life as a puzzle to solve. They cannot view life through the old lens that insists, if I plan enough, everything will go my way. Instead, they begin to witness the intelligence of life unfolding beyond their preferences. Situations align, opportunities appear, endings occur, beginnings emerge, all without force. The greatest freedom awakening offers is letting go of the exhausting role of being the controller of everything. Once this illusion falls away, what remains is a deep trust, a surrender not of effort but of unnecessary resistance. And in that surrender, life becomes lighter, more open, and far more meaningful than control ever allowed. One of the most profound shifts awakened people experience is the collapse of the ego's illusion of control. Before awakening, most people operate under the unconscious belief that if they plan enough, worry enough, or try hard enough, they can control the outcomes of life. The ego thrives on this illusion because it creates a false sense of safety. It whispers, if you think through every possibility, you can prevent pain. If you work harder, you can secure the future. If you impress others, you'll be accepted. But awakening dissolves this illusion completely. Awakened people see that life has never truly been under their control. They see that events unfold according to their own natural rhythm, independent of personal desires or expectations. This doesn't mean they become passive or careless. It means their relationship with life becomes more fluid, more trusting, and more aligned with reality. Instead of attempting to control life, they learn to cooperate with it. Before awakening, the mind believes that control equals safety, that if you predict every outcome, you can avoid the ones that hurt. But awakened people realize that life cannot be predicted, it can only be lived. The constant effort to control life becomes visible as a source of suffering, anxiety, and inner conflict. And once they see this clearly, they simply cannot go back to believing that control brings peace. Awakened people also stop seeing themselves as the center of the universe. The ego creates a constant narrative of my story, my problems, my desires, my fears. Everything is filtered through the lens of me. After awakening, this lens disappears. Life is no longer a personal drama. It becomes an unfolding process that includes everyone and everything. The ego's grip loosens, and with that, the constant pressure to maintain an identity falls away. They no longer see themselves as separate from life or from others. The boundaries created by the ego dissolve, and they experience a deep sense of interconnectedness. Where the ego sees competition, awakened people see unity. Where the ego sees threats, they see opportunities to grow. Where the ego takes everything personally, awakened people understand that most actions and reactions of others come from their conditioning, not from conscious intention. This shift also changes their emotional landscape. Instead of being thrown into fear when things don't go as planned, they trust the process. Instead of clinging to outcomes, they surrender to the flow. Instead of resisting uncertainty, they embrace it. This surrender isn't weakness, it's profound strength. It's the realization that life becomes lighter not when you control it, but when you stop trying to force it. Once a person sees the illusion of control clearly, it becomes impossible to go back. They cannot unsee the truth that life moves with or without their plans. They cannot pretend that fear-driven control is real safety. And they cannot return to the exhausting effort of holding everything together through force. This is why awakened people move through life with a quiet confidence. They are no longer fighting reality, they are flowing with it. One of the most profound shifts that happens after awakening is the disappearance of the illusion of separateness. For most people, life feels like a constant struggle of me versus the world. There is a sense of division between oneself and others, between success and failure, between good and bad, between what should be and what is. But after awakening, this duality loses its hold. It becomes impossible to see life in fragmented pieces the way you did before. Instead, everything begins to appear interconnected, woven into a single living fabric that you are a part of, not separate from. Awakened people can no longer believe that they are isolated beings trapped inside a lonely mind or body. They experience themselves as expressions of the same consciousness that flows through everyone and everything. This doesn't mean they lose individuality. It means they stop mistaking individuality for separation. The walls that once felt so solid between self and others suddenly appear transparent. You begin to see that the fear people carry, the love they seek, the confusion they feel, and the pain they hide are not so different from your own. Judgment fades, not because you force compassion, but because you naturally recognize the shared humanity in all beings. When separateness dissolves, so does the obsession with personal story. Before awakening, your life feels like a movie in which you are the main character. Everything revolves around your goals, your fears, your struggles, your ego. But after awakening, you realize that your story is just one wave in the ocean of existence. The wave is real, but it is not separate from the ocean. You still have preferences, emotions, and a personality, but you no longer cling to them as your identity. This shift brings a quiet freedom. The need to defend yourself, prove yourself, or be right simply fades. Not because you try to be humble, but because the belief that you are small or incomplete dissolves. Awakened people also stop perceiving life as something happening to them. Instead, they see it as something happening through them. Life is not an enemy to fight or a puzzle to solve. It becomes a flow to participate in. You no longer feel like a victim of circumstances. Challenges still come, but they no longer feel personal. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" an awakened person asks, "What is life showing me through this?" Every experience, even difficult ones, becomes part of the deeper unfolding. The disappearance of separateness also changes the way awakened people see conflict. They no longer get lost in the surface drama. They can see the wounded child behind anger, the insecurity behind arrogance, the fear behind control, the longing behind attachment. Rather than reacting, they respond with clarity. They see the root instead of just the symptom. They understand that every person is acting from the level of awareness they currently have. Ultimately, awakened people cannot see the world as fragmented anymore. They cannot hate without understanding. They cannot exclude without noticing the pain behind exclusion. They cannot attack without feeling the wound that creates the attack. Awakening doesn't make life perfect, but it changes the lens through which life is seen. And once the illusion of separation dissolves, it never truly returns.